So a while back, I watched a show called Catch Teenieping, and I did not like it very much. I just didn't think it was a very well constructed show, despite how it had decent animation at times. The concept of the show wasn't really something it stuck to. The characters were either a bit flat or actively annoying. The action was mostly weak chases, and I overall got pretty bored with it. I had said I might cover a second season, but that would likely take a lot of convincing to get me there. So there are 5 things that got me to the point of actually watching season 2. Firstly, some of you guys asked for it, and if you want to hear me talk more Teenieping, then I will oblige. Second, the second season of the show was only half the length of the first and felt like far less of a commitment to actually dive into. Third, there was someone that told me that the second season was actually an upgrade, getting more into the world and lore, an intriguing prospect that I had to see for myself. Fourth, some evil incarnation of Miku herself commented on my page and then drew me as a Teenieping, which I had to take as a cosmic sign that I was meant to continue watching the show. And fifth, my first video made quite a few Teenieping fans mad, and I wanted to address that. I get it. It can suck to listen to someone talk about how and why they don't like the things you like, but I have to say that the specifics of the response were interesting. I had a handful of people outright saying that they hated me over this and not explain further. And look, guys, it's fine if we disagree. If you got something out of Teenieping that I didn't and truly do enjoy the show, then I am genuinely happy for you. I am glad that you were able to get importance and meaning out of this show when I wasn't able to. That said, though, differences in opinion on a children's animated show are not something so dire that it warrants hating anyone. We can disagree, and I am happy to discuss our disagreements. However, if you are hating people over such a small thing, that's frankly childish behavior, and you need to re-examine your priorities. I was not out here ragging on this show and calling it bad for no reason or off of just a glance. I had watched the entire show, taken notes, and tried to lay out arguments for why I didn't think such and such element worked. I wasn't going, oh wow, this sucks, haha, and leaving it at that. I was trying to figure out what exactly were the problems here. I understand it can be annoying to see someone say that they don't like a show for no reason, but I am also of the belief that if you love something, you do have to be, on some level, at least willing to consider the flaws that it might have. I am not saying that you can't disagree with me in the comments, but I am saying, let's do it in a productive way. If you disagree with me, tell me about why you do, or what about this series spoke to you in a way that it didn't for me. I'd like to hear it and get a different perspective on what the show has to offer. And I know that YouTube comments can just be kind of like that at times, so I doubt that me saying any of this will actually change how anyone acts, but I would at the same time like to try and foster a community of discussion in my comments is all. And to be clear, there were some of you that were really delightful and did tell me exactly why you enjoyed the series, which I do really truly thank you for. But for now, let's get into talking about season 2. I want to explore if it was able to improve over the prior season in any way. So I was promised that there would be more lore this season, and that is indeed true. Instead of just kicking off partially in the middle of Romy already on her quest, we instead begin the series with the promise of a more full overarching story, though it's not perfectly handled. Romy is still indeed living on Earth after the end of the first season. The end of that season implied that there would be more adventures to reassemble the rest of the magic floating cubes that got scattered at the start of the series. But it seems like the series is ignoring that because we just go in a completely different direction, getting to see a new part of the Emotions Kingdom, the Jewel Forest. This is where the Jewel Teeniepings live. Jewel Teeniepings are just what they sound like. They're a subspecies of Teenieping that have a kind of jewel attached to their bodies. This doesn't make much of a difference, though, as they're really more distinguished by whatever trait is granted them by their name. While we can see the jewels on these Teeniepings, there are very few times that what type of gem they have is called out, and what type of gem they have does not seem to have any relation to their personality, powers, or any other aspect of them. The jewels are there, but they don't really play that much part in the series outside of one episode involving some thieves that realize the little gems might be valuable. There is a little bit of an attempt at lore with these guys in terms of how they take care of their gems and all, but it's so blink and you miss it that you're unlikely to pay it much mind. A Teenieping in a mask with a magic key shows up and opens a rift that sends all the jewel Teeniepings down to Earth, much in the same way that a batch of them got sent down the first time around in the first season. Obviously, that is a problem since they shouldn't be there, but it isn't until late in the season that we're given what might have been the reason behind doing this. Namely, that the jewel Teeniepings seem to power the forest in some nebulous way. There is some very light implication of this, with the fruit they used to eat no longer growing there once they're not there early in the season, but it isn't until late in the season that it's actually confirmed to us that the forest is dying in the absence of the jewel Teeniepings, giving us the reason that they absolutely have to go back there, despite the fact that they like living with Romy after they're caught. While I respect that the show did try to hint at the reason for the jeweled pings needing to be there in the forest and why it's a problem that they're not there, I do think that hinting was perhaps a little too subtle. The forest dying without them there is some clearly nice big stakes, but we don't get to experience that until the last few episodes of the series. If we had those stakes as something in the back of our mind through the whole season, it would give the story a little more sense of urgency. As it stands, whenever someone says something about how it's taking a while for all the jewel Teeniepings to be gathered up, it's not clear why that's a problem because we're not informed of the potential consequences for the failure of this mission. Letting us be aware of that up front would have helped a lot because the only stakes otherwise are just that the partner Teeniepings of the season are mildly upset that their friends are lost, which, if you care about their feelings, is something to care about, but otherwise doesn't feel as fully compelling as the potential destruction of an area of the kingdom, something I think that Romy would care about as a princess of the kingdom. Oh, yeah, right. Romy is still here. She's still a princess, but at the start of the season, she's sworn off using magic while living on Earth, which I'll get into the messy handling of that when we talk about the characters, but obviously she gets dragged into things because how else would this be a magical girl show? Apparently there is now a school for Teeniepings that trains the ones that are candidates to be royal Teeniepings, which, if you remember, are the ones that are used for transformation and seem to be advisors and helpers of the royal family on some level outside of that. Well, 3 students there are jewel Teeniepings, and when they hear about the rest of their kind getting scattered on Earth, they steal a car and a magic item to go and fix the problem themselves, kicking off the plot and getting Romy back involved again when she encounters them. This season is shorter than the last, with just 26 episodes, and I should probably mention that the season is technically called Twinkle Catch Teenieping, likely because of the idea of sparkling gems or something of that nature. And I think the shorter season does keep things more on track than the longer season did, even if the show still starts to feel a little bit repetitive after a while. This season also, I will admit, does have a stronger through line. While the Teenieping in the mask, who we'll call Mask Ping like the characters do, does not show up in every episode, she shows up often enough that she feels like she is consistently causing trouble for the characters. I had thought that having an antagonist in the form of Giggle Ping in the second half of season 1 made the show stronger, and having Mask Ping here does help in a similar way. Her plans don't always make complete sense, and it is often very unclear what she is actually trying to accomplish, but she is indeed an improvement to the season over something that was more directionless slice of life like the first portion of season 1. There is at least a little mystery to make us question what's going on here, and she ends up being a strong force in the season, unlike Ego Ping last season, who just showed up at the very end as a sort of surprise villain. The thing that is still holding things back, though, is the fact that we never see Romy trying to unravel these mysteries herself. Sure, she reacts when information is plopped down right in front of her, but we never see her go and seek it out. We see a few Teeniepings trying to do some investigation at a point or two, but not Romy, which feels off since she is the lead character of the show. It would be a benefit to see her be more proactive rather than seeming to just coast the whole time. The season also has a bit of a bolder finale this time around, going for something that is very clearly meant to lead into the next season. The first season did have something of a cliffhanger at the end, implying that there were more Teeniepings to be found, but it also wrapped itself up just enough that if there was never another season, things could still feel satisfying if you had watched and enjoyed the show up to that point. For season 2, it seems like they already knew there was going to be a season 3 because the cliffhanger is way more substantial and has a very clear plot hook for the next season. I'll talk about it more fully once we've spoken about one of the characters involved in it, but this is very much doing that thing where the kids show will suddenly ramp up in intensity for the last few episodes after being a cheery slice of life the whole season. And honestly, if they knew for sure that there was going to be another season, I do not see a problem with this. It's far more intriguing than how the last season ended with the cheesy fake out about Romy leaving her friends behind only to end up actually staying with them. It gives something to speculate about during the wait for the next season. I wouldn't say that the plot this season ever reached the point of being actively good, but it's an improvement over the last, enough for me to consider it passable enough, I guess. That said, though, Teenieping is a show that is very obviously geared at children, and I do think that kids deserve better than passable. Kids deserve quality entertainment. Even if it is something that is a vehicle for selling toys, I think it should be able to stand on its own as a strong story, and in the case of media like this, an adventure. While I can say there has been an improvement this season compared to the last, I don't think it's enough that I would recommend it to a parent for their kid. It's better, but not quite enough. Real quick, let's catch up with everyone from last season to see how they're doing before we get into everyone that's new. Romy is about the same as she was at the end of last season, mostly just a normal kid, though by this point, outside of 1 or 2 moments in the season, her edges have been completely sanded down to make her a plainly nice girl. We're not getting any of her abrasiveness or brattiness anymore. I would be inclined to say that this is character growth, but it doesn't really feel that way. It feels more like she was adjusted for the sake of marketing her as a good influence. And I say that because there seems to be a moment of introspection from her at the very end of the season that could lead to growth, but at the moment I can't justify growth that happened before it, you know? At the start of this season, Romy is just kind of doing her thing on Earth and is apparently sworn off doing anything magical. This is something that is obviously going to get broken by the end of the first episode so that we can keep having magical adventures on the show, but also because when you take a step back and look at it, it doesn't really make all that much sense. Sure, Romy wants to live an average life with her friends for now, but we're not given a reason beyond that for why she has supposedly sworn off magic. Not that she doesn't need it right now, or that it would be too dangerous. Nothing. And that wouldn't bother me so much if not for the fact that the end of last season clearly put forward that there was still work to be done and Teeniepings to be found. But Romy has seemingly decided that she's done now, despite the way that she was depicted as taking responsibility for the mass Teenieping release. As a result, this switch-up ends up feeling less like Romy wanting to live averagely and more like she is shirking the duty that she took up. It is also made patently obvious this is not something permanent by the way that the cat doctor who is in charge of all the magical knowledge is actively working on a new magic phone for Romy. If she's not doing anything magic, and he knows that, why is he working on something for her to channel her magic through? Sure, you could argue he's prepping it for the future for when she eventually returns home to her role as princess and all the magic that comes with it, but in the first episode, people really do talk about this choice like Romy swore off magic forever or something. I'll remind you that the last season ended with her friends finding out and accepting her, and that her cousin Sarah still seems to have magical capability despite seeming to permanently live on Earth. But let's be real, this isn't really here as a character choice, but to be a reason for a set of Teeniepings to distrust Romy when they are in peril at the end of the first episode. They take her having sworn off magic as a sort of abandonment, and thus need to be convinced that she really does want to help them. This leads into a last-second transformation and the big climactic moment of the episode with the Teenieping she saved all being like, wow, she broke her oath for our sakes. And yeah, I guess technically that's what happened, and this is supposed to be a big triumphant hero moment, but because of the short runtime of the episodes, it doesn't fully work. We didn't have enough time to really be sold on it being a big deal for Romy to do magic again, or that this was some kind of oath that she was taking very seriously. It feels more like she took a little break from a sports team or something. Once again, the show having half-length episodes is really coming around to bite it in the rear, as it doesn't leave enough room for more robust development or the build-up that is needed for these moments that are intended to be big to really hit the way the show wants them to. The first few episodes verge on trying to do something interesting with Romy's character, but the most we get is her being worried about how her friends will react to her doing magic, something they took pretty decently last time around, so there's really no reason for her to be working herself up like this. Romy doesn't really go through any real development this season. She doesn't really have a long-term arc. Like I said before, she spends most of the season just kind of coasting along. And on some level, for a half-length series with even less episodes than before, that's kind of fine. But when it feels like the season wants to start expanding into bigger ideas and plot lines, it does stand out when the lead is perhaps even more static than she was in the first season outside of the very start and the very end of the season. It almost feels like the writers didn't entirely know what they wanted to do with her. Given the developments at the end of the season, I like to think that season 3 will actually deliver on a personal journey for Romy, but I'm not going to hold my breath either. Most of our other characters are also still existing in about the same kind of space that they were before. Sarah is still running the bakery with the trio that I refer to as the Bakery Boys working for her, though there seems to have been just a touch of a reset from the end of last season. In an early episode, she makes an effort to hide a transformed Romy for them, despite the fact that it was made pretty clear that they became aware of magical stuff at the end of the last season, or at least that Sarah promised to explain things to them. Maybe it's something we're just gonna hand wave away. It hardly matters since they're not really all that involved in this season. Once in a while, they are convenient magic victims, and that's about it. Well, except for Kyle. Kyle gets a whole episode that is focused on him after he gets a rejection letter from an international pastry school that he was hoping to get into. Through this, we find out that Kyle seems to be in some level of conflict with his family about him baking or making a career out of it. He even goes so far as to say he's not going to bake again without actually talking to his family about it. It seems like he cares, but it's also something he's giving up pretty easily on when he's in a low mental state. After Teenieping makes him hallucinate wildly, he gets his spark back because the magic was already in his heart or something of that nature. It's nice that the show is trying to elaborate on it more, but it doesn't quite hit because we're not actually seeing this conflict with his family. We're just seeing him talk to himself about it, so it can be hard to tell if this is something that he's actually having to regularly fight for, or if he might be blowing things a little out of proportion. And this is something that I think also stems from the constraints that the show is under. With those half-length episodes, this isn't something that we really have that much time to show, and I also think that because this is a 3D animated series, there was some level of avoidance to showing his family because that is a whole new set of models that would have to be designed, rigged, tested, and animated. A set of characters that we likely wouldn't see again, so why put in that level of effort? I would like to see more attempts at delving into the sidecast in future episodes, but it really didn't happen that much this season, which leads me to believe that this was more of a one-off experiment than a sign of the future direction of the series. Romy's classmates also don't get much focus either. In the last season, because of the high episode count, there were quite a few times where a character that was interacting with magic was one of her classmates, which ended up giving a little window into their lives or their personality. But this time around, there was maybe only 1 or 2 episodes like that. It's nice, but not enough to elevate them beyond being background characters, not even side characters. Mean Girl Lena also continues to be there without much to her than just being a mean, entitled girl. This show certainly doesn't have time to actually delve into her in any meaningful fashion, so I never really expected that it would, but there is a part of me that wishes we would get a little more dimension out of her. In particular, it doesn't seem like she has a focus in her cruelty. There's not a specific thing that she picks on people for. She just seems to be mean for no reason and about anything, choosing whatever is the meanest thing she can say at a given moment. And like I said, I don't expect anything deep, but the lack of any direction leaves her feeling more one-dimensional and cartoonish than some of the other flat characters. Like, for example, if she was a rich girl that was specifically making fun of others for being less affluent than her, it might give me a stronger impression of her as a character without actually having to do much characterization. However, her bullying is incredibly scattershot, leading to the only descriptors I can really attach to her being what I've told you: mean and entitled. Romy's friends also haven't seen that much adjustment, which I kind of expected, but they're also around far less than I expected them to be. Romy spends a lot more time with the Teeniepings this season, or with another character that we'll get into a bit. Given that they had specifically been let in on the secret at the end of the prior season, I had hoped this season might utilize that. Maybe they're able to cover for Romy when she has to dart away or something, but that wasn't really something the series chose to do. Maybe like once or twice, but even then I can't really recall it. And that feels a little weird for me because that is a very easy bit of comedy for a magical girl series to mine. It's an unfortunate consequence of the short episodes that the series isn't able to really delve into any of the side cast. Doing so would only enhance the series, making the world around Romy feel more well realized. The Teeniepings getting up to mischief does feel like it could leave room for this to happen, put a little focus on the victim of the episode, but we're more likely to get focus put on the Teenieping instead most of the time. Part of me feels like this could be alleviated by having more full-length episodes, leaving space for us to do things like have B plots or just take more time and have more depth in the A plot and delve more deeply into concepts. As for the Teeniepings, if you really liked any of the royal Teeniepings from the last season, royal meaning the ones that Romy was able to transform with and thus got the most screen time, then I'm gonna have to disappoint you by saying most of them aren't around a whole lot. I personally didn't care for them much, so that's not a big deal for me, but if you love these little things, sorry, they've all been exiled to teach at some little school in the Emotions Kingdom, training up Teeniepings that have the potential into being added into their ranks. They show up like 2 times, once to be a plot device in a weak episode, and a second time to be exposition generators at the end of the season. The only one that sticks around is Heartsping, who seems to be the only Teenieping that's carried between seasons at all, as far as I can tell, looking forward at the season beyond this one. She seems to be a designated partner for Romy through the entire franchise. In fact, there's a movie for this show that came out pretty recently in Korea, and I think it's some kind of origin story for the two of them meeting. Either way, Heartsping has been put into more of a mentor role this season as she runs a mini Teenieping school on Earth for the Jewel Pings for most of it, which ends up with her being presented in a more mature light than the shenanigans of the prior season did, which means the time or two that she doesn't hold up to that standard of being a mentor and does engage in somewhat childish behavior ends up starting to feel kind of out of character for her. She's just mostly a consistent calming presence and doesn't have too much of an impact on things. There is one time where she runs off after Maskping when spotting her, but whatever happened in that little adventure of hers occurs entirely off screen, and we never really get to see or even hear about it. If this were a show with full-length episodes, that could have been an episode's B-plot, but because we're running with the half-length episodes, it ends up hitting the cutting room floor. That said, though, I do think that she is slotting more into the role of a full magical companion more this season than she did last time around. While she was there from the start of last season, it didn't really feel like she had any raised importance over any of the other Teeniepings. This season she does, which makes her feel more like Romy's right hand rather than just one in a crowd. As for the rest of that crowd, Romy only has 3 other Teeniepings that she transforms with this season, and instead of having to collect them all up over time, they're all with her from the start. Firstly, we have Trustping, the Teenieping of, well, trust. He's mostly fine, but he is the one that I found the most annoying this season. He's the one most likely to jump to conclusions and things of that nature. And I must admit that he's the one where the cutesy little verbal tick that each of the characters have is super annoying. Most of the Teeniepings derive their verbal tick from their name in some form, with a few exceptions, but that means when this guy speaks, we just hear him go,
"Trust! Just one more bowl, trust! Me too! Trust! Do you feel better, Trust?"
I couldn't stand it, and it soured me against the little guy. Then we have Teenieping, who you can likely guess from her name is the Teenieping of laughter. She's fine enough, but she does run into that issue that if you don't find the jokes they do with her funny, you're not really going to have a very good time. She's not the worst thing in the world, but she does have a tendency to be the most engaged when there are antics happening, and if you don't find Teenieping antics cute, which is the case for me, you might end up getting a little annoyed with her. Lastly, there is Joaping, the Teenieping of kindness. She is the most tolerable of these 3, mostly because she is the most soft-spoken and sweet, which leads to less chances for her to be actively annoying. It also feels like the show actually wanted to have an arc with her, but it didn't play out very well, and I think it was weakly handled. Early in episode 6, Joaping mentions that she can't use transformation magic with Romy, and this is something we're never shown. There's never been a moment where Joa and Romy tried to transform together and weren't able to pull it off. While this is a cool concept for a problem one of the Teeniepings could have, since they are the key to the transformations, the fact that this was suddenly dropped on us without any prior indication of this being a problem and is just a one-off mention does make it feel like it's coming out of nowhere. It's an idea that could be fun to explore, but we don't actually explore it. It's just mentioned and then we move on. This is that same episode where a Teenieping makes Kyle wildly hallucinate his younger self, which I did not mention before was actually at Joaping's encouragement, trying to use magic to solve a personal problem for someone else without consulting or informing him that that was going to happen, purely because it was a magic that had made her feel better in the past. In case you're wondering how that ends, Joaping is simply forgiven for interfering without any self-reflection because she's still learning. In the next episode, we do end up dealing with Joaping managing to transform with Romy for the first time. The scene itself, while not anything groundbreaking, is actually pretty competently done for the most part and gets the job done. However, if this was something we had built up to and seen a struggle for Joaping and Romy, it might have been more impactful. While payoffs are great, they can only be as good as the build-up that got us there. Obviously, you don't want to do this too long and risk dragging out the plotline to the point of boredom, but if we had at least one instance of Joaping and Romy not being able to transform together, it might have helped. Because the magic system is so loosey-goosey in this series, I don't even understand how this can be something that can be failed out outside of outside interference. In an ideal world, each of the companion Teeniepings might have gotten a little arc of their own that played out in a subplot in episodes, giving more growth, especially in this season. These three are all meant to be students, so having them grow and experience life lessons to become more mature is easily baked into the concept of their characters, but we don't really see any continuous growth in them outside of that little bit of Joaping figuring out how to do transformation magic. There are sort of like moral of the week moments, but those don't feel like something that they are actively carrying with them from one episode to the next. They graduate from Teenieping school at the end of the season, but it's hard to tell what they've achieved to get to that point and how they have grown outside of just going to the classes that Heartsping taught. C's get degrees, I guess. One benefit to the shorter season, though, is that there are fewer Teeniepings that need to be caught. We're given an exact number at the start of the season, 15, which does not include the 3 that were already at the Teenieping school. You'll notice that is less than the number of episodes in the season, which does mean that we get some episodes without having to catch a Teenieping at all, which get used for a variety of different purposes, from Teenieping shenanigan episodes to just slice of life content, and then the plot-heavy ones at the end of the season. Because there are fewer extra Teeniepings that are getting caught, it seems that they decided we would see more of them instead of them all being exiled off into their cubes once they were caught. And this makes sense to me. It's not like they were really needed last season, and we only saw maybe 1 or 2 come back at a few points, but I think there was just a more manageable number this season that they could figure out how to work into episodes. Most of the time, they're just there in the background or part of the Teenieping shenanigans, but it did feel a little satisfying to see the collection of them grow over the course of the season. It wasn't enough of a presence for me to fully buy that Romy was truly sad about seeing them all go home at the end of the season, but it was enough that it worked narratively that all of them got to take part in the graduation ceremony, since I had seen most of them hanging around in the back of the school scenes or participating. Like, if you look at this image here, only half the Teeniepings in this are main Teeniepings. The other 3 are collected ones that are just around and participating. If you are curious about any of them, episode 24 has a sort of polka rap song in the middle that lists all the Teeniepings. What you get from those short clips in that song and what is said about them is enough to sum up most of the spare ones. And yes, I will admit that even if I don't care for the subject matter, the song is kind of cute and mildly catchy. The entire season is just out on YouTube if you want to go ahead and watch it, so you can take a peek there. And with that, there are only 2 more characters that we need to talk about. This season introduces another princess and her companion Teenieping, Romy's cousin Jenny and her Teenieping Onlyping, who is representative of devotion. Now, you might remember that Romy already has a cousin, Sarah, who runs the bakery, but while Sarah can do some level of magic, she's not referred to as a princess, and it isn't implied that she and Jenny are siblings or anything of that sort, so we can kind of assume they come from different sides of Romy's family, but we've never gotten a distinct family tree for Romy, so who knows. Jenny's parents disappeared some undefined amount of time ago, so Jenny has been living with Romy's family and is kind of quietly coping with that. She comes around to visit Romy a few times during the season, and every time there is something a little ominous going on with her. She seems plenty fine most of the time, but there does end up being something that always feels a little off. She's mostly very shy, though, keeping to herself. She's around the same age as Romy, but you wouldn't know that from a glance. Her design definitely makes her come off as older and more mature, but I get the impression that is somewhat meant to be a reflection of how losing her parents might have had to make her grow up a little more quickly. It's clear she's holding a lot back, though, and this somewhat uptight character design is likely meant to be a reflection of that. Only Ping is exceptionally devoted to Jenny, which makes sense, but it is definitely being displayed as a devotion that is perhaps too overzealous. She is very willing to put others down for small perceived slights, and there's definitely a sense of jealousy and ownership over that relationship that she has. It is indeed devotion, but it's an unhealthy version of devotion, which is just another thing that adds to the sense that something is not quite right with the two of them. Well, by the time Mask Ping specifically calls out,
May the crown go to the real princess!
You're starting to put the picture together, which means that by the time that it's revealed in the second to last episode that Mask Ping is Only Ping, you've got a solid idea of what the plot twist is. Yeah, Jenny is the real overarching villain of the season. I like this. I like Romy having some family drama related to her being royal. I like that she is betrayed in a major way as like this sort of stepping stone to her growing up. I think it could have been better executed, but overall this is a good development and gives us somewhere more substantial to go next season. The big cliffhanger is that Jenny, having done a complete 180 on her cousin, is revealed to have been using Romy to get her hands on a magic spellbook that is specifically set up so that only the true successor to the throne is able to get it. Once she has that, she's going to finish things off, but ends up running away with Only Ping in order to take care of the little thing because she's gotten hurt trying to protect Jenny. Jenny is doing all this for a mix of reasons. For one, now that her parents have disappeared, she's having to sit there and watch Romy have basically the perfect life. She's a princess. She's loved. She seems to get about anything she wants. She has her whole family around to support her. It's clear that Jenny feels like she's lacking that, and that jealousy eventually morphed into resentment that Romy could have so much while she has lost so much. That's also good drama. That's something real and relatable and human. The only downside to that motivation is that Romy really didn't do anything wrong. And that's not to say that Romy had to do anything wrong, but last season it turned out that she wasn't the one that released the cubes when she thought it had been. And this season the betrayal is not anything that was spurred on by her behavior, it just happened. She played no part, she had no agency that could have stopped this from happening. And like I said, I don't necessarily need that to happen for the story to function, but Romy has been so flat and static this season. Having Romy even have just said or done something offhand that was a much bigger deal than she realized would have been something that could have lended to characterization. And I think part of me searching for that is because things with Jenny are so contradictory and messily done. She said,
I got sick of playing your kind, naive sidekick.
But with Romy living on Earth, that clearly wasn't something she was having to do anymore. We also never saw that demonstrated. Every time we saw them together, Romy clearly treated Jenny as a friend and an equal. What we are being shown and what is being said aren't matching up, and maybe this is meant to be that Jenny is taking things as more of a slight when they're not, but we never get to see her alternative perspective, which makes things kind of hard to square. We just see flashbacks of her standing in the background and smiling at family events where Romy is the focus. That's it. The framing doesn't really make her perspective clear. Like, yeah, Romy is going to be the star of the show when she's blowing out her birthday candles, Jenny. Maybe the show could have shown Jenny celebrating her birthday on her own to contrast this with Romy making a comment that with how shy Jenny is, they didn't think she would want a big fuss, and Jenny could throw back that nobody even bothered to ask her what she wanted. All that would make her perspective more clear. It wouldn't even make Romy's family entirely the bad guy if you just frame it as a miscommunication. The only mistake we see Romy make is in this moment, when begging for this not to be true.
I want the old Jenny back, the kind, caring Jenny.
And then we get a really weird line. Jenny essentially tells her to stop putting on this kind princess act, which, if that is her perspective, fine, I guess, But then she says,
"While you play the happy princess in the kingdom, I had to struggle just to survive."
and that seems to be demonstrably untrue. Jenny seems to be well cared for by her extended family. In her flashbacks, we see that she seemingly has full access to the palace and she seems clean, fed, and healthy. You can argue that her emotional needs are not being fulfilled, which is clearly what this is all about. But even then, I would hardly call that struggling to survive. Maybe this is meant to be a preteen over-exaggerating things as they are prone to do. But in a show like this that is being constructed for children who will take things at face value, this is poor wording. As far as we can tell, Jenny is not living on the streets and begging for scraps. And then we have the issue of Jenny's parents, the situation of which is confusing. We're told that they disappeared, and I'm left unsure if they literally vanished while off on a task, or if this is the show trying to skate around saying that they died, which kids shows can have a bad habit of doing. That's a known factor about Jenny for most of her time on the show, but then Jenny says this.
"One day, by accident, I found out what happened to my parents who had vanished. Things that the grown-ups had never told me."
It makes sense that the circumstances that exactly surrounded the vanishing of her parents would be something you might not tell a kid that age. However, it then gets complicated in confusing ways within minutes. Jenny says that the spell book, which the two of them, children, have managed to get away from a literal dragon, is what her parents were after.
"This book was what my parents were after."
Romy comes back to this with,
"Jenny, but that's not the reason why your parents vanished. It was definitely because of the Teenieping cube."
This raises a few questions. Jenny and Romy both seem certain of their version of events. How can they both be so sure of such differing information? This does not seem to be a shock to Romy, whereas Jenny seems to have learned by overhearing information. Was Romy informed of the circumstances of the disappearance when their own daughter wasn't? Romy seems certain that it was the Teenieping cubes. She was in the room when those scattered, and Jenny's parents don't seem to have been. How can she know that for sure, and how did the cubes dispersing cause them to vanish? Maybe some of these questions will be answered in the next season, and maybe we're not meant to think too much about it, but they are some hanging things at the end of the season that it doesn't really feel like we're going to get an answer to because the information the show is giving us seems kind of conflicting. It feels confusing and thus messy. If this were a show for adults, this conflicting information with a truth to be revealed would be plenty fine, and I would hold off on making judgments. But when you have such contradictory information in a show that is obviously not meant just for elementary school kids, but young elementary school kids who, like I said earlier, tend to take things at face value, I don't really know what they're meant to make of this. I don't know if this is a translation issue where things aren't coming across quite right, or if this messiness extends from the original show, but despite Jenny's twist being an ultimate good for the season, I think that the way it was handled does leave a little something to be desired. I should also mention that we've had yet another retcon. Apparently, it was Jenny that manipulated Teenieping, who manipulated Happying into releasing the cubes. We've removed Romy another step of responsibility on that, I guess. Jenny didn't need to do this. I don't know why they threw it in there. She ends up saying that scattering the jewel Teeniepings presented a better opportunity or something like that. So instead of the retcon, just paint her as taking an opportunity, guys. Not all your villains need to be some interconnected web. All that said, I do think that we are on the path to redeeming Jenny in a season or two. I doubt that they'll push her beyond redemption. They are already demonstrating that she still has a soft side by her relationship and care for Teenieping. Teenieping is likely to be redeemed too, likely channeling her devotion in a more healthy way than before. I doubt they'll see much punishment either. Teenieping doesn't seem like a show that's going to condemn a child to the jail dimension or something like that. So let's talk action. This was another one of my major complaints last season. A lot of season 1's action was chases, just Romy running after the Teeniepings or trying to track them down. I understand that they didn't want to show her trying to fight or stomp on little mascot creatures, but it was hardly like catching them was any sort of puzzle to outwit or something of that nature. I frankly found the action boring. Romy's powers inconsistent, and the concept of her as a magical girl underwhelming. Now, I never expected traditional fights out of Teenieping since the goal is capture, not defeat, but this season was perhaps even worse for the action side of things. There are many, many times where Romy transforms and seemingly did not need to. I mentioned the last video that transforming didn't seem to grant Romy any physical enhancements. She doesn't seem to run faster or be stronger anyway. I questioned why this was a full transformation magical girl show outside of a desire to sell dolls. Afterwards, I considered that Romy, due to her age, might still need her magic items to focus her power, or might need to be transformed in order to use her magic as possible off-screen explanations. However, this season did give me explicit confirmation that that is not the case. In the finale episodes, Romy uses magic without being transformed to both create a barrier and, in a joint effort with Jenny, fly through space to the Jewel Forest. I would say that transformation lets her catch Teeniepings, if not for the fact that her catching device and transformation item are one and the same, so she always has access to her catching device. I will not be convinced that the catch function does not work if she is not transformed. I once again question why she needs to transform in this show. There are multiple instances where Romy transforms, but the catch is made because other Teeniepings talk the new Jewel Ping down enough that they agree to be caught. In some of those cases, Romy doesn't even have a chase. There are times where trickery is used to catch the Teenieping, once again, with no magic needed. The princess forms don't even seem to have unique magic at all this season. The most we see out of them is generic magical blasts. There was at least an attempt to give each of the 6 last season their own magic, even if it was inconsistent, but this season, I see no reason why Romy needs 4 different forms that are all functionally the same outside of the prior reason of selling dolls and merch. I do always try to be understanding of the fact that these kids shows do need to move merch in order to be viable in a lot of cases. However, even if you are trying to sell your magic princess to little girls, you need to integrate whatever you are trying to sell into your story well. Otherwise, your story will just come off as an advertisement. If you want to court a wider audience, you need to keep from feeling like just a toy commercial. You can take one look at the Teenieping school, placed in a prominent position in the bakery with no place for the Teeniepings to actually hide, despite the fact that magic must supposedly be kept from regular people, and the part of your brain that tells you that this is a product the show is trying to push lights up. Unfortunately, I often feel like I am being marketed to when watching this series. And sure, maybe that's because I have an adult brain and this series is made for small children. But hey, guess who can say no to a show for kids if it gets into that toy commercial zone? Their adult parents. Beyond that though, the magical side of Romy's life just ends up feeling dull this season. Sure, there was no strategy to what princess she chose last season, but it feels even less relevant this time around because it doesn't feel like there's any difference between the princesses at all now, and we rarely see her do any actual magic when she is transformed. What should be the most exciting part of the episode ends up boring. Most things are resolved by talking it out. And great, yeah, I do love modeling conflict resolution for children, but it happens sometimes between the Teeniepings with Romy just standing there transformed in the background. I've got no problem if the show wants to shake the formula up, but it feels like it is still also trying to stick to the formula of Romy being a transforming magical girl when the episode adventure doesn't actually need that. When the show does these things, it feels torn between trying something new and sticking to what it knows. It's a weird place for things to sometimes be in. It's fine for a show to grow and evolve, but this mixed formula of doing things does make this season a weaker magical girl show, and I don't think the show was even terribly good at doing that before. One other thing that bothers me a little is the continued way that Romy can scan for the Teenieping of the week, but doing that scan doesn't give her any actual information outside of a location and a stock image of the Teenieping. One of the others will then have to tell her who it is and give her the rundown, or sometimes she even has to ask. Given that the Teeniepings are a known thing where she comes from, it feels strange. I don't expect her to have encyclopedic knowledge, but if her magic phone can tell enough from a scan to give a stock photo of the ping, then why not give it a Pokedex function to some extent and have her be told by the phone or by reading some information that it pulls up? This is definitely a little thing that just personally bothers me, and I don't expect anyone else to feel the same, but I wanted to bring it up. It just makes it like Romy doesn't know anything about what she's doing when she's not able to get the information herself and has to be consistently told by other Teeniepings. At least her being told by her phone would feel more like she is consulting a resource rather than being explained to. This season is better in one respect, though. The amount of times that each transformation is used is far more balanced than it was in the prior season. If you don't recall, in the last season, the pretty pink princess was used far more than any of the others, used nearly twice as much as the next most used transformation. That's been leveled out to give everyone a little more screen time this season. It's not a perfect distribution, but it's better. Princess Diaheart gets used 6 times, Princess Ruby is used 5, Princess Sapphire sees 4 uses, and Princess Emerald makes 3 appearances. By that, obviously Emerald is getting the short end of the stick here with the fewest transformations, but that is Teenieping's transformation, meaning the first time it was used got some special attention drawn to it, which I think helps give it a little more attention despite the decreased screen time. This definitely could have been made more even, but there were also an increased number of episodes this season that didn't have a transformation at all, either for slice of life or main plot reasons. Having a lower episode count did leave less opportunity for the spread to get as wide as it did last season, though, so it's possible that in a longer season, these numbers would be drastically different, or the number from season 1 would have been different if it was shorter. With these two datasets being in so completely different circumstances, it's hard to compare them completely. It would do us better to compare this season against something like season 3, which seems to have run the same length as season 2. There is also the fact that we're only functioning with 4 princesses this season instead of 5 and then eventually 6, which made it a lot easier to give each more screen time when there was less competition. I would also like to point out that the transformations themselves feel more varied this season, a definite improvement from the last time around where they felt very samey. This time, the dresses are all of similar length and general shape, but the details are able to make them feel more varied than they did in season 1. The dress shape is likely a result of the team behind the show still figuring out how to make these work in 3D animation. I took a peek ahead, and they definitely start varying up the basic shape of the dress more in season 3, and then definitely in 4 and 5, which I appreciate. For this season, details make all the difference. Each and every one of the designs has different sleeves, giving the shoulders a slightly different shape each time, and while the skirt shapes themselves might not have much variety, the patterns and designs on them go a long way to making them feel distinctive from each other. At a glance, it feels like different layering and shaping, even if it's just a design essentially printed onto the same basic shape. The one place that feels like a letdown in the designs, though, is that they don't play more into the theme of the season. Outside of the light placement of a few gemstones on the skirts or other places in the design, the jewel aspect feels nearly as inconsequential to Romy's princess designs as it does to the Teeniepings. And this wouldn't bother me so much if not for the transformations being named after gemstones. What about Diaheart says diamond? Sure, pink diamonds exist, but that's not most people's first thought, and even then, hot pink doesn't suit a pink diamond like a baby pink does. Princess Emerald gives more of the impression of a topaz at first, and Ruby is purple. Yes, technically purple rubies and yellow emeralds exist, but I wouldn't be able to tell you what gem each of these transformations was at a glance. And I wish I could. Sure, it can be fine to break conventions sometimes, but it doesn't feel like that's what they were trying to do here. It more feels like the designs and the names were made separately and then paired up later. Last time that we talked about Teenieping, I mentioned that the dub was not great. You can go back and watch that video to hear my exact complaints if you're curious.
The love we cherish until the very end has wakened up this new power. Ego-Ping, this is the end.
This time around, the dub was, as far as I can tell, entirely recast and done by an entirely different studio, which was the right call. While it's not perfect, and I don't think that it's entirely up to par, it is a vast improvement from the first season of the show. At the very least, even if English might not be the first language of these actors, I have no idea if it is or not, I don't end up feeling like they're acting in their second language. They definitely feel more natural. There are a few spots where the dialogue still feels a little bit stilted, but they're fewer. The weirdness this time around comes from the different versions of the show that you can watch rather than the comedy of the dub itself. Like season 1, you can watch this season on either Netflix or the official YouTube channel, but neither feels like a definitive English version. If you watch the series on Netflix, you might think the series has an instrumental theme song this season. You can find out that is definitely not the case by simply switching languages and finding out that the Korean audio track has vocals during the theme. Going over to the YouTube version, none of the episodes have a theme song at all. It's a separate video that is just there to watch or placed at the start of the full season playlist, but it does have an English vocal track now instead of just being instrumental. Netflix still has the episode titles in Korean, and on YouTube they're in English. It really ends up feeling like Netflix got a first draft and then they uploaded the final cut on YouTube, but cut off the theme song for some unknowable reason. It's really odd and just makes the whole thing feel clumsily put out in the English market as an afterthought. I just wonder that if this series had had its feet more under it when it was released over here, if it might have had a more robust fan base. The videos definitely pull views on YouTube, but it doesn't feel like there's much conversation surrounding the show, making me wonder if those views are just coming from YouTube kids auto-playing this for iPad babies. Is Season 2 better than Season 1? On the whole, yes. I think that some of the side casts have seen some expansion, the season feels tighter and more focused, the overarching plot, it feels like it's more thought out, and it feels like the world has been a little more expanded. These are developments that I would want to see in a second season in general, but they can be even better to see in a show that had a weak first season since it means there's been an effort to improve. However, I do think that the short runtime of the episodes is starting to become more of a constraint on the series. I remarked on the first season not really having a ton of room for robust looks into characters when so much of the screen time of the episodes was eaten up with magically dealing with the Teenieping of the week. As the series tries to explore other characters and have an overarching storyline, that is seemingly going to become more of an issue. In my view, they either need to consider running longer episodes to give more breathing room for these things, or they need to consider being willing to do part 1 and part 2 type situations to spread one story over more than one episode. There are also plenty of places where the show either still needs improvements or has actively regressed. Everything to do with the magical side of Romy's life feels like it's taken a step back. Her attempts to catch Teeniepings are less interesting, and sometimes it can feel like she's not the one putting in the effort. While the drama that seems likely to unfold in her family is interesting, the fact that it came out of nowhere for her and isn't something she is personally connected to other than being related to Jenny and being the object of her resentment does remove the potential of some more tantalizing drama. I know it's a kid's show, but inter-family drama is something that is almost inherently dramatic and mature, so I would like to see the series sort of grow up each year with its audience and what they can handle. I need to see more dimensions to Romy as a character. We've set aside the mild misbehavior of the early first season, so what are we left with? What of her there is her to explore? How can we delve more into her as a character outside of surface level emotions? The end of the last episode of the season has her going to talk to the magic cat doctor back home. Is this a step forward in her maturing and taking on the mess that is left before her at the start of the next season? I guess I wouldn't know unless I watched season 3. I am not making any promises there, but if you are curious for yourself, the third season is currently being officially released in English on YouTube at a pace of 1 episode a week. While I can't speak to the full quality myself, as I am not currently watching it, from the short clips and stills that I have seen, it does seem like there was a little bit of extra polish added to the visuals, which is fun. Either way, I've been Mel, and thank you so much for making it this far into the video. I know a lot of you are here for the pre-cure content that I do, so you taking a chance on me talking about something else, even if it's in a similar vein, does really mean a lot and gives me the confidence to branch out into other topics. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions also give me a similar boost. I like to see number go up as much as any other person, but so many of you are genuinely insightful and kind in your comments that I love getting a chance to discuss with you. If you want to support me even more directly, I do have a Patreon, which will be linked in the description of this video. As always, though, thank you so much for letting me info dump at you.